Okay, so I hope my screen is visible to you. So today we'll talk uh, about the last part or last, let's say, theme of uh, our syllabus, which is called as molecular spectra. So this is very interesting again, and it is something which actually forms a very vast area of research, mostly in chemistry. So, because as you know, basically, chemists do work a lot with different molecules, and spectroscopy is an integral part of that. Specifically, people who work with physical chemistry, they are in that particular direction. A lot of research is going on in the direction of understanding what sort of molecule will give what kind of spectra, and basically what are their applications. It could be pharmaceutical applications, it could be medical, it could be drug delivery, it could be a chemical industry, it could be even like, let's say, like detergent, it could be toothpaste. So everywhere chemicals are there, and understanding the property of the molecules, like, because people are synthesizing different molecules and compounds, and molecular spectra they do check regularly, and that is why this is an integral part of, let's say, you can say most chemists are using it quite regularly, and they deal with this particular topic quite a lot in details. Okay, so whatever we are going to talk in this course, that will only be like, let's say, few classes will devote for this particular topic. However, this is a very vast topic, and in principle, in some institutes, they actually offer separate courses on this particular topic. And if like somebody is interested, they can also take these courses, and you can see specific books which are actually available on this topic. So this is the summary is that this is a very vast topic, and it is actually very much relevant to research. Okay, so let's see what is it. So as the name suggests that it's molecular spectra, so it's the molecule which is involved, and spectra means, like spectroscopy, spectra like absorption, emission, things like that. Okay, so as we know that a molecule is nothing other than it's a combination of several atoms which are arranged in a particular order. Okay, so atom we already know, and this is an atomic physics course. So far we have only talked about atoms. So we have looked at one electron atom, then we have looked at like a few electron atoms, then we have looked at many electron atoms, and we have seen how does the behavior changes for such different atoms while we change the atomic number, and how can we find out the energy eigenvalues and the solutions. And effectively, the final idea is that once we have an idea about the energy eigenvalues and everything, and then we can find out the selection rules, and if there is any transition is happening, that will give rise to some sort of spectra, and the spectra you can analyze, and basically you can correlate with the experimental result. And there we have also explained different effects also, like fine structure, hyperfine structure, Zeeman effect, um, then Stark effect, things like that. Okay, so atomic spectra is mostly all these things, and these things are kind of like coming in and out around the spectra, or let's say energy levels that are originating from a particular atom. Now, when we are talking about a molecule, such atoms will be involved in the construction of a molecule. Okay, so very simply, we can think of like a molecule like hydrogen. Okay, so there are two hydrogen atoms. So we have solved the wave equation for hydrogen atom, and there we have got the exact solution, and we have discussed that thing in great details. So now let's say when we are talking about molecular spectra, then we are basically dealing with H2. Okay, so this is nothing other than there are two hydrogen atoms. Okay, they are bonded together, and they're forming the molecule. So now the energy level or the distribution of the energy levels will be different in the case of hydrogen molecule compared to that of individual hydrogen atoms. Okay, so you can also think of another molecule where hydrogen is present and nitrogen is present. So it is ammonia molecule. So here you have basically one nitrogen atom and we have three hydrogen atom. Okay, and they are bonded together. So essentially a molecule can be made up of same type of atoms or different type of atoms. So one is called as homonuclear and other is heteronuclear. Okay, if it is same then it is homo. If it is different then this is called as hetero. Okay. So essentially, a molecule is made up of summation of different atoms. Now, we have seen that the spectra can be either emission spectra or it is absorption spectra. So we have already, I think, explained it in details that what is an emission spectra and what is an absorption spectra. That basically, whenever you have an incoming electromagnetic radiation, that is interacting with your system and the atoms are basically absorbing it and going to a higher energy state, then it is absorption, and if the reverse is happening then it is emission. Okay, so whatever be the case, there will be some transition between different allowed energy states of the molecule also. So here also the same argument is valid. Now here we have to remember a few things, that the energy level scheme of a molecule is relatively complicated than that of an atom. Okay, why? Because here we have already seen an atomic system is not so much easy to deal also, but here such atoms will be more than one in number. Okay, so that is why the energy overlap between such energy levels will be higher here, and that will effectively give us a much complicated form of energy scheme. Now, and the second point is that the molecular energy states are not always specified by the angular momentum vector operator. So, if you remember that when we solved the hydrogen atom problem, there we have seen that the wave function is also an eigenfunction of this L square operator. However, or in the other way, we can say the energy eigenvalues can be expressed in terms of L also. But here it is not necessarily true. So energy states do not always have to be specified by L. Okay. And the third point is that the nuclear motion cannot be ignored completely. So because there could be relative motion of nucleus, so there that might need to be considered into the calculations or whatever basically formalism taking into account. Okay. So now let's look at a very simple picture. For example, diatomic molecule. Okay, so here as the name suggests, we have di means two atoms. Okay, so here we have basically two atoms. One is here and other is here, and they are connected through a particular bond. So here we are assuming that this is like a straight line which is connecting them. Okay, so we can actually define an axis which is perpendicular to that bond that is connecting these two atoms. And let's assume that these atoms are, let's say, positioned in a way so that it is symmetric with respect to that particular axis. Okay, this axis. Okay, so here what happens is that for such diatomic molecule, the total charge distribution is symmetric around internuclear axis, and component of angular momentum is conserved along this axis. Okay, so since this axis, you can think of it like a mirror axis, charge distribution of this particular atom and that particular atom will look identical, so it is somehow symmetric around that axis. Okay, or you can think of like if I just turn it positions of the atoms also, then it will look somehow similar, and the component of angular momentum is conserved along this axis. So basically along this direction of this axis. Okay, so it could be like this or it could be like that, whatever it is. Okay, along this axis the component of angular momentum will also stay conserved. Now the nucleus vibrates along the internuclear axis and the whole system rotates around its center of mass. Okay. So if there is a vibration of the nucleus of these atoms, then they can actually have this effective vibration that will lead to some sort of motion, and around this internuclear axis it can be rotated. Okay, so we can define a center of mass of this system which is effectively falling on top of this axis. Now, the quantum mechanical Hamiltonian of such a system has to include the interaction and motion of atoms. Okay, so essentially that is the final aim, that you have to construct the Hamiltonian of such system, where all these interactions and motions will be counted. Okay, however, this is not a very easy exercise, and this is little bit complicated. Okay, so any questions so far on this? No. Okay. Now think of massive nucleuses. Okay, so as we have seen earlier, that usually the nucleus has a higher, or let's say heavier mass compared to that of the electrons. So the motion of the nucleus will be slower than that of the electrons. Okay, and here usually we take into account the Born and Oppenheimer approximation. So we have already seen this thing earlier also. So what essentially it says is that the nuclear part and the electronic parts are not dependent, so they can be separated, or let's say the nuclear motion and the electronic motion can be treated separately. So here what we can say is that the wave function of the electronic motion we can solve subject to the nuclear coordinates kept as parameters. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that let's say we keep these nuclear coordinates at a fixed parameter. Let's say we have a diatomic molecule, keep them at R1 and R2, and that is fixed, and then we can solve the electronic problem with respect to these two coordinates. Okay, and then we can also solve the nuclear motion keeping electronic motion aside. Okay, so these are independent. So one can be solved subject to keeping subject to the fact that other is not changing during the course of that motion. Okay, so that way we can separate out the electronic and the nuclear contribution. Okay, so now let us look at different types of molecular spectra. So we have basically three specific spectral ranges, and they will be corresponding to different transitions between different molecular energy levels. Okay, so the first one is called as molecular spectra. Sorry, electronic spectra. Sorry. Okay, so this is the type of spectra which is observed both in the emission and absorption spectra in the UV and visible regimes. Okay, and this is common both for homo and heteronuclear molecules. Okay, so just look back once. So it is electronic spectra, which means that electrons are the primary entities of interest here, and this kind of spectra can be observed both in the emission and absorption spectra, which means that whenever there is a emission of atoms or electrons are happening, then this is present, and absorption also, that means jump from lower to higher energy level, that is also happening, and the spectral range will be ultraviolet or visible regime. Okay, and both homo and heteronuclear molecules can demonstrate this, which means that let's say hydrogen, ammonia, these types of molecules can have electronic spectra. The second type is vibrational rotational spectra. So, as the name suggests, that this spectra, or let's say the energy levels, will be originating as a result of the vibration and the rotation of the atoms which are involved a molecule. Okay, so it is typically observed in the absorption spectra in near infrared regime. That falls within this particular length scale, that is 1 micrometer to 100 micrometer, and usually homonuclear molecules do not produce this, so you will not see this in hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, these kinds of molecules. Okay, the third type is pure rotational spectra. So it is the effect of pure rotation of these atoms around the internuclear axis probably, or other axis. And this is also absorption spectra, and it is observed in the infrared regime, that is 10 to the power 2 to 10 to the power 3 micrometer, or microwave regime, that is 10 to the power 3 to 10 to the power 4 micrometer. So it is quite high lambda, which means that it will be little bit lower in energy. Okay, and it is also observed in heteronuclear molecules which are diatomic. Okay, so we have seen three types of spectra: electronic, vibrational rotational, and pure rotational. Then we have rotational spectra. This is usually observed in the case of molecules which have a permanent electric dipole moment to absorb or emit electromagnetic radiation. So let's say if we take the example of carbon dioxide, then you have oxygen atoms which are bonded with the carbon atom on both sides. So here we have basically a permanent electric dipole moment that can actually exist. Now, for heteronuclear molecules, the center of the positive and negative charges do not coincide, so that is why they have a permanent dipole moment. So they also can observe this kind of rotational spectra. So we'll look into these different spectra into details later. So let us first look at this part. That is, how does rotational spectra appears? Okay. So here we'll take the simple example of a rigid rotor. So what is a rigid rotor or rotator? Okay. So you have probably come across rigid body in your classical mechanics course or earlier. That this is basically a body where the interatomic distances do not change with time. Okay, and rotator means that the object is rotating, of course. Okay, so now let's imagine that we have a two atom system. Okay, so here let's say we have atom A, and then here we have atom B. So one has mass m1 and other has mass m2. So m1 and m2 are not same, and these are point like masses. So this means that they are very much concentrated in the nuclei. So the typical size will be of the order of femtometer, and the intermolecular separation is much larger. That is, let's say, of the order of 10 to the minus 10 meter. That means, let's say, yeah, like 10 or 100 nanometers, something like that. Okay. So let's assume this system. So we have two masses. Let's say these are two atoms, which are representing basically these two atoms, and they are very small in size, and they are actually connected by some sort of an axis, or let's say a bond, and we have the center of mass C along that axis around which they are rotating. Now, if R1 is the distance between M1 and C, and R2 is the distance between M2 and C, then actually we can write down the total distance R, which will be a sum of R1 and R2. Okay, so here these two masses, they can independently rotate around the axis which is passing through the center of mass. That means this particular blue axis. Okay, so effectively we will have different radiuses of rotation. So one will be R1 and other will be R2. So that is why we have defined these two. Okay, so I hope this part is clear. Any question? Okay. So now here the system rotates about an axis which is passing through its center of mass and perpendicular to the internuclear axis. So that I just explained. Now, by definition of center of mass, we can write down this, that is m1 r1 will be equal to m2 r2. So this is the moment which is equal, and second condition is that r1 plus r2 will be equal to r. Okay, so these are my equation number 1 and equation number 2. Now using them, I can define r1 and r2 in terms of my known quantities, which are mass and the distance of separation between the atoms. Okay, so I can write r1 which is equal to m2 divided by m1 plus m2 times r, and r2 will be m1 plus m2 times r also. Okay, so I hope this part is clear, and you are kind of like understood. You have understood it. Now I can write down the moment of inertia of this rigid rotator around the axis of rotation. So if I is the moment of inertia, then I can write down I to be equal to m1 times r1 square plus m2 times r2 square. Okay, is it clear? Okay, so none of you are answering.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so here we have basically defined R1 and R2 in equation number 3. If we substitute it into this equation, then we can rewrite I to be equal to m1 times m2 by m1 plus m2 times r square plus m2 times m2 divided by m1 plus m2 times r square. Okay, now let us define this quantity, that is m1 times m2 divided by m1 plus m2 to be called as mu, which is also defined as the reduced mass. So we have seen this thing earlier also, we have explained it in details, that instead of independent masses, since they are rigid bodies, so there of course the distance is not changing, so we can effectively approximate that as a third, or let's say mass which can effectively take care of both these masses. Okay, so here we define it by mu, that is called as the reduced mass, and with that I can write down the moment of inertia to be equal to mu times r square. Okay, so basically 1 over mu will be equal to 1 over m1 plus 1 over m2. Okay, now if I have that, then I can basically say that the diatomic molecule is equivalent to a single point mass, that is mu, at a fixed distance r from the axis of rotation. So such a system is called as rigid rotator. Okay, now let us see how can we find out the energy levels of such a system. Okay, so just keep in mind that here we are not solving this equation for two masses which are rotating like that. This is basically a model which represents a diatomic molecule. So here we are assuming that the bond that is connecting these two atoms is rigid and it is fixed. Okay, just give me 1 second. Hello. हाँ हाँ हाँ। आपका फाइनेंशियल से बोल रहे हैं? शायद किए होंगे 2-3 दिन पहले सर। हाँ हाँ, नहीं अच्छा ठीक है, मैं आपको बाद में फोन करता हूँ, ठीक है, मैं क्लास में हूँ, बाद में फोन करता हूँ। Okay, so essentially what we are considering here is a diatomic molecule, and the bond that is connecting these two atoms is fixed. Okay, so that is a rigid bond, so it is not like a spring that is connecting. Okay, that is extending and kind of stretching, or like stretching and kind of like compressing, things like that. Okay, anyway, so we have to solve the Schrodinger equation. So we, since there is no v here, so essentially we can write down the Schrodinger equation to be of this form, that is del square psi to be equal plus 8 pi square mu by h square times e psi will be equal to 0. Okay, so here v is 0 as r is fixed. Okay, so essentially what I'm saying is that, let's say this is the dynamic molecule system. Okay, now usually, sometimes we take it like this, that it is like a spring which is connecting them, and then let's say the spring is elongated. Okay, or let's say it is compressed. In that case, there will be some potential energy which will be into picture. But here this is not the case. Rather, what we are assuming is that these are the two atoms, and this bond that is connecting them is a very rigid one. Okay, so there is no stretching or basically compression. So that's why there is, since there is no movement in the distance, so delta r is effectively 0 here. So that is why there is no potential energy here. Okay, so as a result, so as you know, this del is basically a function of r theta and phi. Since there is no movement, so r is fixed. Okay, so that is why the radial part is not contributing here. So del r will be equal to 0. So here we have two other variables, that is theta and phi, which we have to look at the variation. Okay, so we can write down this equation to be equal to 1 divided by r square sine theta times del theta of sine theta del psi del theta plus 1 by r square sine square theta del 2 psi del phi 2 plus 8 pi square mu e divided by h square times psi equal to 0. So this is the equation which you have seen earlier also. I mean, the functional form of del square in this particular spherical polar coordinates. Okay, you have seen earlier. So I hope this is clear. Okay, let me know if you have any question. Do you have any question here? Okay. So now if I step forward, so then I can write down this equation to be mu by I sine theta times del theta of sine theta del psi del theta plus mu by I sine square theta del 2 psi del phi 2 plus 8 pi square mu e divided by h square times psi to be equal to 0. Okay. Now I will use here the method of separation of variables. Okay, so this is something which we have done earlier also for hydrogen atom. So here the function psi, which is a function, sorry, the wave function psi, which is a function of two variables, that is theta and phi, we will write it down as a product of these two functions, that is capital theta and capital phi. Okay. So here, if I just put the equation number 10 into equation number 9, then I can write down this equation 9 to be equal to 1 by sine theta del theta of sine theta del theta, and phi is outside, plus 1 by sine square theta del 2 phi del phi 2 theta plus 8 pi square I e by h square times theta times phi. Okay, so essentially, basically, I mean, whenever we have del theta, then theta is into the bracket and phi is out, and whenever there is a del phi, then theta is out of the bracket. Okay, so I hope this is clear. So now we are multiplying both sides by sine square theta divided by theta times phi. So if we do that, then the form of the equation will be sine theta divided by capital theta times del theta of sine theta del theta plus 8 pi square I e divided by h square times sine square theta 2 equal to minus 1 over phi del 2 capital phi del phi 2. Okay. Now you can see the left hand side is a function of theta only, while right hand side is a function of phi only. Okay. So if that is the case, then we can put both sides to be equal to a constant, and let's take this constant to be of this form, that is m square. Okay, so if we do that, then we can write down d to capital phi d phi 2 will be equal to minus m square phi. So we have already seen this thing earlier, that why do we need to take this constant in this particular form. The reason is simple, that we want to take the constant in such a way that we can get meaningful or easy solutions. Okay, so that is why we have actually taken this constant to be of this form, that is m square. Okay, so now and the theta part, we can rewrite this equation to be equal to 1 by theta sine theta times d d theta of sine theta d theta d theta plus 8 pi square I e by h square minus m square by sine square theta to be equal to 0. Okay, now if I multiply both sides by capital theta, then I can write down this to be equal to 1 by sine theta d d theta of sine theta d theta d theta plus 8 pi square I e by h bar square minus m square divided by sine square theta times theta to be equal to 0. So this is my equation number 15. Okay. So here actually you can see something. Okay, so let me just erase these two parts and write down this little bit like this manner, then it will look a little bit better. Okay, so now the phi part, we have wrote down the equation in the last slide, that d2 phi d phi 2 will be equal to m square phi. So that minus m square pi, sorry. Okay, so that solution we know already. So this will be phi m, phi will be equal to a times e to the power I m pi. So this is a single valued function at all values of phi, provided m is positive or negative integer, which means that m can take the value of 0, plus minus 1, plus minus 2, etc. Okay, so any question on this so far? No. Okay, so I have a question for you. What is single valued? What is the meaning of single valued? Sorry.
Sir,
Yes.
so say if we have a function, then for say a variable x, it's a function of x. Then for each point, each value of x, there would be a unique y.
Very good. Okay, so we don't call it y, but you can call it fx basically. Okay, so y is basically fx. Okay, very good. Right, correct. Okay, so here for example you can see that you have x, and then for each x we have a unique value of y. Okay, but you can see the reverse is not true. For each y you will not have a unique value of x. Okay, so let's say if my function is like, let's say fx is equal to let's say x square. Okay, then this statement will not be true, because then when x is plus 1 or minus 1, then my fx will be 1. Okay, anyway, so basically single value we understood. Okay, good. Okay. So we have got the solution for the phi part. Now we have to find out the normalization constant. So what we do is that we will use the normalization condition. So that is, we will integrate the product of pi over the total range. So basically pi m star and pi m pi d phi integrated over entire range of pi, that is 0 to 2 pi, will be equal to 1. So if we do that, then we will have the value of this normalization coefficient a to be equal to 1 over square root of 2 pi. Okay, so we have got the total solution of the phi part. So it is basically 1 over square root of 2 pi times e to the power I m pi. Okay, where m is 0, plus minus 1, all these things. Now we have to look at the theta equation. So we have a basically very complicated, not very complicated, but somehow little bit large expression of theta. So we have sine theta times d theta and things like that. So we have a sine theta that is present in this equation. So here what we do is that we will substitute x to be equal to cosine of theta. Okay. So if we do that, then essentially the theta equation will be replaced by an equation which is a function of x. Okay, so x is the variable, so theta is basically being replaced by x. So then we can write down 1 minus x square to be equal to sine square theta, and d theta will be, you can take this derivative rule, dp dx times dx d theta, so which is equal to minus sine theta times dp by dx. Or alternatively, I can say that d d theta is equal to minus sine theta d dx. Okay. Okay, good. So if I finish this exercise, then I will get an equation which is in x, and that equation will look like d dx of 1 minus x square dp dx plus 8 pi square I times e divided by h square minus m square by 1 minus x square, okay, times px to be equal to 0. Okay, or if I basically expand this derivative, so here I have this term, that is 1 minus x square d2p dx square minus 2x dp dx plus I 8 pi square I times e divided by h square minus m square by 1 minus x square times px to be equal to 0. So this particular equation, which is equation number 20, it resembles to that of associated Legendre differential equation. So you have come across this in your math physics course, and I think in other courses also. So finally, we have got the theta part of the equation, which is now a variable of x, of course, to be of that particular form. Now we know the solution. So then we can basically map this problem onto the solution of the associated Legendre differential equation. Now here, if we consider 8 pi square I e by h bar square to be equal to j times j plus 1. So here j is a positive integer. So then what I can do is that I can write down e in terms of these variables, which is equal to h square by 8 pi square I times j plus 1. So that is what my energy eigenvalues are here. Okay. So because keep in mind that I is a constant and h pi, they are of course constant. So essentially E is a function of j, and here j is a positive integer. Okay. So now let's look at the solution. So here Px is identified as the associated Legendre polynomial, that is Pjmx of degree j and order m, and the accepted solutions for theta equation will be basically theta jm, which is a function of theta, will be equal to n, that is a normalization constant, times pjmx, and x is basically cos theta. So you can express in terms of either x or theta. So this is a solution which we know from math physics course, and we have got the expression for energy eigenvalues of course. Now we can use the normalization condition in order to find the value of n. So here basically we will integrate over the entire range of theta. So theta star times theta, and then integrate over this volume, that is sine theta d theta, will be equal to 1. And if from there we will get the solution, that is theta jm to be equal to square root of 2j plus 1 by 2 times j minus m factorial divided by j plus m factorial times pjm cosine of theta. So the total eigenfunction will be a product of theta part and phi part. So here we have this theta part and then phi part. Okay. Okay. So we got the total eigenfunction, of course, for this diatomic rigid rotator system. Now we'll look at the energy spectrum, and we'll see what sort of information we can get out of that. Okay. So now, if you remember, for the hydrogen atom system, we had looked at the angular momentum operators because they are actually quite useful. So here, let us calculate the eigenvalues of L square and Lz. Okay. So here we know that L square can be expressed in terms of these theta and phi variables in this particular form. So here R is not present here, and Lz is basically minus I h cross del del phi, because it's only the z component of the theta component, phi component here. Okay, so if we do that, then basically we can write down L square psi to be equal to j times j plus 1 times h bar square times psi, where j is 0 plus 1 2 etc. Okay, and similarly for the phi part we can do the same thing. So d phi m d phi will be equal to square root of 1 by square root of 2 pi times e to the power I m phi. So we are taking the first derivative times I m. So from here, if you do little bit of manipulation, then you can also see that this phi is also an eigenfunction of this Lz operator. So what we can write here is that Lz psi to be equal to basically m times h bar times psi. Okay, so this is also an eigenfunction of the psi operator. Okay. Okay. So we have seen that both L square and Lz they are basically kind of like having psi as the eigenfunction here. So now let us look at the system here. So we have a rigid rotor system, and the Schrodinger equation here, it gives us psi as a single valued finite continuous function for certain values of E, which are defined by h square by 8 pi square I times j plus 1. Okay. Now here j is 0, 1, 2, etc. Now in classical mechanics, we have learned that if there is an object with moment of inertia I and the rotational velocity is omega, then we can write E to be equal to half I omega square. So having that in mind, we can also write down L to be equal to I times omega. So that is the angular momentum vector. Okay. So using these two, I can define L to be equal to square root of 2e times I, or here h by 2 pi square root of j times j plus 1. Okay. So as energy and angular momentum vector are quantized, so only discrete values of omega are possible. So here omega will be L by I, which is h by 2 pi I times square root of j times j plus 1, and I can define the rotational frequency, new rotational. Okay, hold on a second. Hello? Who is this? Uh-huh. Which course you are talking about? CS. I am not the person in charge. Who gave you this number? No, I am not the person in charge. You talk to, I think, PM Tools, I think AR Academic, you talk to him. Okay, you write an email or you call him. Okay. Okay, chalo. Okay. Okay, so once we have omega, then I can, of course, okay, I can also define nu, which is omega divided by 2 pi. Okay, so this is the rotational frequency that we are talking about. Okay, that will be equal to h by 4 pi square I times square root of j times j plus 1. So we have basically seen that both the angular momentum vector, omega, nu, everything is quantized, and we can express them in terms of the moment of inertia, which also takes care of mu, that is reduced mass, that is constituted of m1 and m2, and here j is the quantum number that is kind of representing the quantization. Okay, so we have got the quantities in terms of basically j and I. Now what we are doing is that we are looking into the rotational spectrum. That means what sort of spectra will arise in this particular case. So we have got the energy levels, and now we will see what sort of spectra is possible in this case. So now what we will do is that we will define an energy function, so in terms of the wave number. So let us define something called as f, which is a function of j, and f is equal to e divided by h times c. So if we put the equation for e, then we can get this form, that is fj to be equal to h by 8 pi square I times c times j plus 1. Okay. Now let us consider h by 8 pi square ic, which is the prefactor here. Okay, to be equal to b. This is the rotational constant. Then I can rewrite fj to be equal to b times j plus 1, where j is 0, 1, 2, etc. Okay. Now I will substitute different values of j. So for example, j equals 0, 1, 2, etc. So if I do that, then for j equal to 0, if j will be 0, if j equal to 1, then it will be 2b, if j equal to 2, then it will be 6b and 12b, etc. Okay, so we will get a series of discrete rotational energy levels whose spacings are effectively increasing with increasing j. Okay, so you can see that between 0 and 2b, this is 2b, that is the separation, then 2b and 6b, this is 4b, then 6b and 12b, this is 6b. So this separation is increasing with increasing j. Okay. And now if I draw this energy level diagram, then for different j, I can see that j equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have fj, which is basically 0, then 2b, 6b, 12b, 20b, 30b, etc. Okay. And if there is a difference which I calculate, then I can see the difference is basically 2b here, then 4b here, then 6b, and etc. Okay. So that is increasing with increasing value of basically j. Okay. Now, if I want to know the transitions, then what I'll do is that I'll look at the transition between an upper level j prime and a lower level j double prime. So these are any two arbitrary levels that I am looking at. So the wave number of the emitted and absorbed radiation will be nu to be equal to fj prime minus fj double prime. Okay. So fj prime will be b times j prime plus 1 minus b times j double prime times j double prime plus 1. Okay. So now the selection rule says that rotational transitions will be possible when delta j will be plus minus 1. So as we have chosen j prime to be higher than j double prime, so we will simply take j prime to be equal to j double prime plus 1. Okay. Now if I just put these values into this equation here, then I can write down nu to be equal to basically you put this thing and then you get 2b times j double prime plus 1. Okay. So simplistically, I can say for any arbitrary value of j, that is the index representing the lowest energy state, the radiation frequency which will be emitted will be 2b times j plus 1. Okay. So if I substitute j equal to 0, 1, 2, etc., so then my nu will be 2b, 4b, 6b, 8b, etc. So effectively we get an absorption spectra of a rigid rotator that is consisting of a series of equidistant lines with constant separation, and the separation is 2b. Provided the transitions start from various energy levels, that is j equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Okay. So these lines are separated by constant separation. So they're equidistant lines. Okay. So now at room temperature, a good number of these rotational energy levels will be well populated. So the population of the jth level relative to the lowest level in thermal equilibrium at a temperature T can be written down to be Nj divided by N0. So Nj is the population of the level indexed by J and N0 is the ground state, to be equal to 2j plus 1 times e to the power minus ej minus e0 divided by kBt, which we can simplify to be equal to 2j plus 1 times e to the power minus b times j plus 1 divided by kBt. Okay, so this is basically Maxwell-Boltzmann statistics which we are using here. And if we plot it, then we will see that means we are plotting the ratio of Nj by N0 with different values of J. So J is increasing means that we are increasing the energy levels, higher energy levels we are reaching. Okay, so you'll see that the ratio is increasing up to a certain value and then it falls down. So you'll get kind of a distribution with a peak around certain value of J here. So at 300K here you see the peak is appearing around 15. However, if the temperature is changing, then the peak can shift, of course. Okay, so I believe okay. So this is what we have learned today about this rigid spectra, and yeah, if you have any question, let me know. So to summarize very briefly, what we have done is that we have seen that what are the different types of molecular spectra. So we have electronic, then we have rotational, then vibrational. Okay, so vibrationals will be mostly in kind of like higher regime. Anyway, so here we are looking at the kind of a digit rotator model and rotational spectra of that. So we have taken the simplest situation system. That means we have a diatomic molecule where both atoms are not same and they have different masses m1 and m2, and this is rigid, so that means the bond that is connecting them is not stretching or kind of like being congested. However, it's fixed in with time. Okay, and then we have taken the rotation of that particular object around the axis that is passing through its center of mass and perpendicular to the bond that is connecting them. Okay, and then we have actually defined the moment of inertia, then we have defined reduced mass, then we using that we have wrote down the Schrodinger equation, and then we have seen that it does not have any dependence on the radial part, so r is dropped off, and we have theta and phi part, so which we rewrote in terms of I think mu and I, and then we have equated both sides because each are function of theta and phi to constant m square. Then we got the solution of the phi part, and the theta part we have substituted again I think cos theta to be equal to x, and then we can rewrite that equation to be of the same form as that of associated Legendre differential equation, and we know the solution. And then when we looked at the total value of psi, basically we got the value expression for psi using the normalization condition, and then we have also got the energy eigenvalues, and then we have seen that psi is also an eigenfunction of L square, Lz, everything, and then we have defined basically the frequency of rotation. No, that we have done actually later. So we have defined an energy function Fj. Okay, here, and we have simplified the expression. Then we have actually looked at for different values of j what are the possible values of fj. So we have seen that the separation is actually increasing with increasing value of j. Okay, and we have actually done little bit of basically more analysis, and then we have seen that this absorption spectra of a rigid rotator is essentially consisting of a series of equidistant lines with constant separation. Okay, and we have also looked at the distribution of this nj and n0, that is the ratio with increasing value of j at 300 Kelvin. So this has a peak around certain mean value of j. Okay, so let me know if you have any question. If not, then we'll finish it here today. Okay. Okay then, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.